By the way, Joe is the only correspondent in the Vietnam War to be awarded the Bronze Star by the United States Army for heroism.
After the book was done, and we pressed them every trip to try to get back to the battlefield. And we came back that third time with 10 of our veterans, and they had promised us that they would let us go back to the battlefield. But we're in Hanoi, and we go to a dinner at the floating restaurant on the West Lake. And there's at one table are these three generals and Hal Moore and myself, and General Phuong was speaking for them. And he said, "We like your book." And I'm just stunned. He said, "We liked your book. You said that our soldiers fought bravely and honorably, and we love our soldiers as much as you love yours." And so it was just like daylight came from that point on.
Now, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you actually flew out to the battlefield in a Russian helicopter.
Yeah.
And the deal was you were not allowed to spend the night there. You were going to be backhauled that evening.
We were all supposed to be back before dark.
And General Moore...
He arranged with God that it would be otherwise.
I think the weather helped.
And General Moore, by the way, General Moore, when I was a boy, was Major Moore, who lived up the street from us, you know, and he was a great guy. He cut some kind of deal with the clerk of the weather, didn't he? And there was some kind of monsoon rain that just deluged the battlefield so that helicopter could not come back and get you, and you spent the night.
First, it was 2 lifts. It had to be 2 lifts, and we put all the Vietnamese and most of the Americans on the first lift out. And Hal was arranging all of this stuff. Yeah. And then as soon as that thing lifted off, he said, "Joe, you need to tell the boys," there were, I think, 5 of us left there, plus a film crew. He said, "Tell the boys to fill up the water bottles in the creek." And I looked at him. I said, "Sir?" He said, "Don't ask. Just pass my orders." And I went along and told the boys, I said, "The old man says get the canteens down to the creek and fill them up, and don't forget the iodine pills."
Right.
And Larry Gwynn, Lieutenant Larry Gwynn, he looked at me, he said, "Joe, has the heat got to the old man?" I said, I'm playing Sergeant Major now. Just do what you're told. And then I go back, and Hal says, "You need to get the boys to drag up some firewood." And I still ain't figured this out, but there's a big dark cloud on the horizon, and a monsoon rain came. Hal Moore had told me 15 years before that we were going to spend the night on that battlefield someday. He needed that. He needed to walk the perimeter of those old foxholes and commune with the souls of every man who died there, friend and enemy. And he arranged that with God. I'm just as confident of that as anything, because there came a monsoon rain, and after it lifted, we built a little fire with the firewood, and we were sure that chopper was not coming back because they couldn't find it in the daylight. We had to... We used Hal Moore's old battle map and my Boy Scout compass, and Bruce Crandall guided that helicopter to the LZ. So we spent the night there, and as it got good dark, there was an absolute, the most beautiful shower of meteors I have ever seen. The sky was full of tracers. And I had a feeling, and I think all of us did, that the souls of all those who fell there were telling us they were at peace, and so should we be.
Yes, I agree. I think the clip
we've been out on the road quite a bit talking about why we made the film, and so I think we found it very humbling to try to tackle this subject, and every day has been a revelation. And I think Ken and Jeff Ward, our writer, and Sarah Botson, our producer, and I have each come to this from a different vantage point. We're 10 years apart in age. We figured out after the fact. So Jeff is in his 70s, Ken is in his 60s, I'm in my 50s, and Sarah's in her 40s. And each of us thought we knew something about this subject, depending on our age and our perspective. And it turns out that every day we realize what we didn't know, either about the many different ways this war affected the Vietnamese, or the strategy that was being decided in Washington, Hanoi, and Saigon, or what it was like for the soldiers and Marines that we sent over to Vietnam to fight, or what it was actually like on the home front. Just day after day after day, there were things we didn't know that we thought we knew.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of been overwhelming, frankly. I mean, if you could see in our office the just groaning bookshelves of books. I mean, it's an overwhelming story, and the complexity of it and the sort of emotional, intellectual challenges of what we tried to do was just humbling. And I think, as we tried to sort of work our way through this piece by piece, we would have moments of feeling it was such a dark story and such a tragedy. It was hard to find redemption, meaning, something to hold on to. And what we ended up coming away with in the end was gratitude for the people who shared their stories with us, and a deep understanding that sort of as part of the human condition, we all face tragedy, and what we have is the ability to tell a story about it and to make sense of it and create a narrative. And the brilliance and sort of honesty of everyone who shared their stories with us, that's the redemption that we've been able to find in this very difficult story.
This is early March. It had rained, remember up in I-Corps, this is up north, it rained constantly during the fight for Hue. It rained and it was so cold up there. I couldn't believe how cold it was at night. And this is only midway up Vietnam, which is about the size of the state of California. And I was thinking that if it's this cold where we are, these guys up in Hanoi must be freezing their asses off. They were 400 miles further north. And I was thinking, if I were up in North Vietnam and it's that cold, I'd be fighting to get down south. But we had moved along the banks of the Perfume, and we had just cleared one of these big imperial tombs. This is where the Vietnamese had buried their emperors in the old days. And this tomb was like something out of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Lost Horizons. It had Buddhist monkeys in the upper things of the tomb. And I didn't speak Vietnamese, I spoke a bit of French, and I could speak to the monks in French, and they could speak to me in French. It was really bad French. And I asked them if they'd seen any enemy, and no enemy here. And we moved along about 400 or 500 meters away, and we got a whiff of something that was really dead. I had a sergeant named Ruben Torres from New Mexico. Shortest paratrooper in my outfit. We had to load him down with extra equipment when we did a jump because he'd just drift right off the drop zone. But he was a sharp NCO, E5, and he comes over to me and he says, "Sir, there's something more than just sheep or whatever out here." He said, "I saw this bone in the ground, and it looked like an animal, but it turned out to be the elbow of a woman who had been buried there for some time." And we started to dig this up, and it was a trench that went on for about 100 yards, and in that trench were over 150 men, women, and children and babies that had been killed by the North Vietnamese, the VC, and buried there. They'd been executed, all of them had had their hands tied behind their back, and they'd been shot. And most of them had been shot, some had not. And I was only hoping that the ones that had been buried had been dead before they were shoveled over. But they'd been in the ground for some time. Now, this was one of the massacres that had occurred when the North Vietnamese and VC had invested Hue. They had lists prepared of the people. You saw a reference to it here, the murder squads, the killing, assassination squads that went in. Now, understand that, I was an Eagle Scout, and this is my first confrontation with what communism and what the enemy could do. And it was a shock. we got a lot of flack for that. I actually gave sworn testimony to the Army in the 70s about that incident because they wanted to go back and verify that what we had seen, which was only one of the graves that were later discovered, was authentic. And there were certain American academics, Mr. Chomsky at MIT, who maintained this was all up front and it was a South Vietnamese American trick. But Lin's people going to Vietnam unearthed some pretty amazing stuff, and it shows up in this piece that you'll see, but that's what that was all about.